few. The rest of the people I know. And this presentation is because I was a tour guide on this yacht in Oakland for 10 years. That was my sort of fun little side job, a volunteer job. So I did tours around this boat, but also I got to go out in the boat when they went down the bay. It was a working historical ship. Does it sound? I'll close the doors. Okay.
Just a second. Do they close?
I believe they do.
Because there's a lot of talk.
So I went out to volunteers on this boat. We went around the bay quite a bit. It was great fun to be on the bay on the presidential yacht, and sometimes we'd actually have Franklin Roosevelt on board.
Oh, really?
Well, a person who played that role.
Oh.
There'd be historic cruises with characters.
Oh, yeah.
And one man who was a retired history professor from the University of California would dress up like F.D.R. He had a sort of a look of F.D.R. He wear the hat and use the cigarette holder. And so we have a picture. I have a picture of Dad, or Dad has this picture because it's before digital time, I think, of him shaking hands with Franklin Roosevelt.
Oh, okay.
The actor.
Yeah.
That was very fun. So it of course was presidential yacht in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
for the president, but it ended up in Oakland. So this is a presentation a little about the history of the ship and how it got to Oakland, California from the East Coast. And you've heard this before. Okay. This is the radio in the radio room of the USS Potomac, and there was one recorded speech that Franklin Roosevelt gave in 1941 from the Potomac. I'm going to start playing that, just a snippet of it, because he talks about what he gets out of the Potomac, why he enjoys the ship, and just the fun he has on board. Plus it goes back to the old days of radio.
Throughout the nation tonight, faithful Democrats are meeting at scores of dinners to honor the founder of their party, Andrew Jackson. Tonight, as he has every year since his election, President Roosevelt will address the Jackson Day dinners. The first formal celebration of Jackson Day took place in 1828 at New Orleans, when Jackson was a candidate for the presidency. Since then, the followers of Old Hickory have made the celebration an annual affair. The chief executive is vacationing and will speak from the presidential yacht, the U.S. Potomac, now in Florida waters. The president will be presented by the Honorable J. Flynn, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, who speaks to you now from Washington. Mr. Flynn.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chief executive will speak to us now from the wardroom of the U.S.S. Potomac, now in Florida waters. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am sitting in the little cabin of the little Potomac in the harbor of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, after a day of sunshine out in the Gulf Stream. That I cannot in person attend one of the many Jackson Day dinners, I regret. But it is good that you are again celebrating the memory of a great American leader who believed, fanatically almost, in the principles of a democracy based on the freedom of the ballot box. I try to get away a couple of times a year on these short trips on salt water. In Washington, as you know, the working day of the presidency in these times averages about 15 hours. And even when I go to Hyde Park or to Warm Springs, the White House office, the callers, the visitors, and the telephones all follow me. But at sea, the radio messages and the occasional pouch of mail reduce official work to not more than 2 or 3 hours a day. So there is a chance for a bit of sunshine, or a wetted line, or a biography, or a detective story, or even a nap after lunch. But above all, there is the opportunity for thinking things through, for differentiating differentiating between principles and mere methods, between the really big things of life and those other things of the moment that may seem all important today and yet are forgotten by the world in a month. That means that if today the fellow next to you catches a bigger fish than you do, or vice versa, as sometimes happens, you don't lie awake at night thinking about it. Yes, you recapture your philosophy.
I enjoy that little quote because it talks about the Potomac. It was from the Potomac, and I think it gives a good flavor of Franklin Roosevelt and his perspective after being in the presidency at that time for 8 years. So that's our visit with F.D.R. today. And, there. The ship was not built first for a presidential yacht. It was a Coast Guard cutter built in 1934 out of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. This is the way the ship looked when it first was built. As you can see, it's pretty flat, pretty level, low, and only in the middle it has the pilot's captain's place for the pilot house and 2 stacks, but everything else is pretty much open deck, and underneath is where the crew had slept, had food, everything was underneath. Well, in 35, Roosevelt said, I don't want the current presidential yacht, and said, pick this one to get converted. So in 35 it was converted, and he started in early 1936 to use it. The reason why he didn't want that is, the reason why I wanted this one and not the current presidential yacht at the time, because the current one was shorter, less space for guests and things, but it was made of wood. Franklin Roosevelt could not walk with the polio that he got at age 39. He got polio, and so he couldn't walk, although the press was pretty good, and they didn't really advertise that too much. People thought he could walk, but he couldn't. So he wanted an all-metal ship. This, then, was what the ship looked like when it came out of refitting for the president in 1936. In fact, this is from April 1936. And as you can see, it now has a whole section of the ship right on the main deck, that first level. So he could be brought up on board, carried most likely, and then he could, in his wheelchair, just go around to the bow, to the aft, and into his quarters, which is that now middle portion of the ship. So that's his area now. And he could even get up on top to that upper deck, which is higher now, and just enjoy the sun and look out. So that's 1936. And this is a shot of it now in Oakland. And it's restored quite well to the presidential level after a rather tumultuous journey to Oakland, and I will explain that in a minute. So this is inside that main, this is a stateroom, main part added to the top of the deck. So this is his, really his eating area, his place to talk with people, and this is just the open area right outside of his cabin. Because the door back at the back there in the middle, that's the door to his cabin.
He didn't have an elevator, did he?
He did. I'll show you that in a moment.
I wondered, because I remember walking up the ladder there, and I wondered how he got there.
And this ladder or stair goes to the lower part, which was converted into cabins for guests. 4 cabins. 2 had 2 beds in it, 2 had singles, and that's where the King and Queen of England stayed, in one of those lower cabins. So it was fun to go down and point out this cabin and say, that's where the King and Queen of England stayed. They even had their own bathtub in that lower cabin. But I'll show you the next shot here, Dad. This is looking at that same stateroom from the back. This is, on the right here is the galley, or the the kitchen for the president and his guests. There was another one for the crew on the other side of the wall there. And this door in the middle with the photo of F.D.R, that is the elevator. There were 2 smokestacks. They took the back smokestack, made it into an elevator shaft. So he could get in here, go upstairs, go out to that upper deck to enjoy the sun, and if people didn't know there was an elevator, he'd surprise them.
Oh, huh.
Because he could not walk stairs. And now this is going into his stateroom, his sleeping quarters. Just a single bed here, and then the back door there opens into the open area in the back, which is the rear fan tail. I'll show that in a moment. But very simple, single bed, because Eleanor didn't really like to travel on water, and she didn't like the Potomac very much, so she never came on board except a few times, not a lot of time.
Where was the bathtub?
Ooh, yes, good question. Right before the hatch there, to go to the rear fan tail, there's a door, that brown line just to the left of that hatch is the bathroom. So they did have a bathroom for him. And that's it. That's the bathtub. And then over on this side would be a toilet. But that's his bathtub, and it was really just a sitting bathtub. It wasn't a full bathtub to stretch out in because he could not stretch out. His legs were lifeless, really. So he'd be set in there, and he had help getting in and out, and probably helped.
If then there's a dip going down, that'd be like he could bend his knees and the feet would go down.
No, he'd just sit in here with his legs stretched out.
All right, yeah.
Couldn't move his legs much. But note, right in the middle on the edge there, he had a rubber ducky.
Oh.
And at the time, the Potomac was the only ship in the Navy with a bathtub. Navy ships don't have, and ships don't have bathtubs. Too much water, too much space. But that's his Potomac in the upper left corner. That's the Potomac bathtub. This one is another bathtub that was put in for him, just for him. This is on the USS Iowa battleship. They put that in because one morning, secretly, in November 1943, the Potomac took him out to the USS Iowa. The Iowa then carried him across the Atlantic to North Africa, and then from there he was taken on to the Tehran Conference with Churchill and Stalin. But going over the Atlantic Ocean like that, they had to have a bathtub for him. So the Iowa was the second and only ship to have a bathtub. And this, in fact, is Roosevelt with Stalin on the left and Churchill on the right at the Tehran Conference. So from North Africa, I think he flew off to Tehran, and I think he flew back after that. But that was a secret mission. No one knew about it till it was over. And back on board the ship, we went through his cabin now, out to the rear fan tail. This was my favorite spot on board the ship because there is a ceiling here. The top deck is above, so this is shaded. And this couch or area was specially designed for him because it's steeper, it's deeper in the middle. So he could get on there, push himself back, stretch his legs out. And that's the place that when people do tours on board, take a cruise, that fills up real fast. People like to go over there and sit. But here's the secret. Wait near the end of the cruise when people are getting restless and anxious. They get up from there and I can sneak in and get a seat. This Potomac has some connections to some very historic events. And this down here in the lower right, that's King George. And Queen Elizabeth. So that's the parents of Queen Elizabeth, who died last year. Those were her parents. This is 1939, about June 1939, which happens to be about 3 months before the Nazis attacked Poland and started really the big World War II. So it hasn't started yet, but they came over here the first time a monarch came to the United States since the Revolution. There's Eleanor, by the way, so she's on board, off to the left in this photo. They were here as really a visit to the United States, to the colonies. That was the sort of general presentation to the public. Yeah, they're just here for a visit. But really they were here politicking and working with Roosevelt to try to make sure that the U.S. will stay on the side of Britain, because they probably suspected war would start. Oh, and there's a fun story too about, they took up to the Potomac, down the Potomac River, to George Washington's home for a visit. So King George got to see Washington's home, Washington's grave. I think they put a wreath at Washington's grave. Then from there, they went up to Hyde Park, Roosevelt's home in New York, by train, I believe. And there, Eleanor and Franklin wanted to have a party, a picnic for the king and queen. And they served hot dogs. And the story is, well, I guess some people, I guess some of the English press were aghast. Hot dogs for the king and queen? I don't think they had ever eaten hot dogs. And apparently, at least King George liked it. And I think Roosevelt had a fun little time saying, give me hot dogs. The other picture up there is another historic event, the Atlantic Charter, which was in, I believe it was August 1941, so before Pearl Harbor was attacked, so before the U.S. entered the war. And he secretly went to go see Churchill on a British battleship, Prince of Wales, that was off the coast of Canada. And this is, again, secret, because if the Nazis found out, they could direct their U-boat submarines to try to attack the ships that they were on. But what had happened is that the Potomac went up to Campobello Island, Franklin Roosevelt's family home, summer home, and secretly took him up there and took him out for supposedly a day at sea or something. Then he switched to a cruiser, the USS Augusta, secretly, and a Secret Service agent stayed on board the Potomac with this hat and his cigar or cigarette holder, and so everyone thought, oh, he's still on the Potomac. But Roosevelt got on the Augusta, and that took him over to the Prince of Wales to see Churchill. So they spent the weekend chatting and talking, and what came out of it was the Atlantic Charter, which was just a 2-page press release. And it sort of defined their ideal vision of the world after World War II. So they wasn't there yet, but they were trying to envision what it'd be like. And those principles formed the basis of the United Nations Charter. But that was a secret trip. And in fact, that is the USS Augusta that he got on board, that battleship. So this then is also that same ship with Omar Bradley and some of the other generals and military leaders for D-Day, because here's the connection of Potomac to D-Day. The Potomac took Roosevelt to the Augusta. The Augusta, for that one trip, but the Augusta was the command ship in the English Channel for the invasion of France on D-Day. So that was the main ship, so there's connections. And this is a picture on the left of the pilot house, the control place, the steering location for the Potomac. Those are crank windows.
Yeah.
And this is the way it looks outside, looking down from the pilot house. So this is what the captain and the pilot will see. That's the bow of the ship. And this hatch goes down into the crew's quarters.
Oh.
So the crew slept forward in the lower part of the ship for the Potomac. I enjoyed standing on the front, not quite on the bow, not the Titanic position, but up near the winch there, especially on windy days on the bay,
Yeah.
to get that wind in my sail. The ship was decommissioned after Franklin Roosevelt died. Truman didn't want this presidential yacht. So he went back and got the Sequoia, brought that back into service, the wooden yacht, but also he used another ship Truman did called the Williamsburg. They sold the Potomac in 1945 to the state of Maryland. State of Maryland used it until 1960 for, I think the governor used it sometimes to make it a fun ship for guests and things. Also they used it for the Maritime Commission and some state studies, scientific studies. But one thing they did, the state of Maryland, is they wanted a memorial to Franklin Roosevelt. They took off the rear smokestack that had been switched into an elevator, and they took it off the ship and they put it on the shore as a memorial to Roosevelt in Cambridge, Maryland. And that's where it sits now. So the one on the left there, that is the one now on the Potomac, is it's a fake.
Yeah.
It's a completely different smokestack. Then in 1960, the state of Maryland decided that they've had enough with it. So they sold it off to some people who took it to, and this is a very poor photograph, but this is the Potomac in Barbados, I believe, so out toward, well, they're using it as a ferry boat. In the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, just sort of running around that area. And that is an area that Roosevelt had taken with the ship itself, because he did some trips out there, like to the Bahamas, the Virgin Islands. But this is just a really fuzzy photograph of it in Barbados. Well, that ferry boat thing didn't work too well. A couple of years later in '62, the company or whoever owned it sold it to a company from Southern California. And so then that started the journey to California. The new owners said, we're going to take it over to the Seattle World's Fair in 1962. So let's take it up there and open it up as F.D.R.'s presidential yacht. Come visit it, see where Roosevelt walked and sailed. So that was a first attempt to try and make it a historic vessel. But they got through the Panama Canal, came up the coast, got to about San Diego, and that's about it. They didn't get any farther. Engine problems and other problems with the ship. And so they stopped, I think it was actually in Redondo Beach that they stopped and left it there, never got to Seattle. Well, this is the engine room, current day engine room of Potomac. Just to show you what the engines look like, but also to say these are new old engines. The engines, the originals are gone. These were taken from, I think, an old tugboat. Same type of engines, though. And restored down here. But this is two big engines. One on this side, one on the other. And Dad worked the engine room in the LST. So he worked bigger engines, I think, than this, displacement and more powerful. But these have no transmission. And the LST had a transmission. So like in a car, the transmission you put into reverse, car goes back. What's happening is the gearing on the drive shaft is changing. This has no gearing like that, no transmission. So when they want to go in reverse, they bring down the engines to go in reverse. The engines slow down and start firing in reverse order. Which to me was very unusual because I had not heard of that until the Potomac. So they just go in reverse. That's for you, Dad. Picture of the engine room is for my dad. And another famous owner of the Potomac,
Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley. Yeah. So I think it was 1964. This boat's still sitting in Redondo Beach or somewhere south. And Elvis got wind of it. And he decided he was going to buy it. He wanted to give it to March of Dimes, which is a nice feature, a nice gesture, because March of Dimes is the polio organization that Roosevelt was really behind and supporting a lot because he had polio. So Elvis said, I'm going to buy it for $55,000. I'm going to give it to Danny Thomas.
Yeah.
Then, if the March of Dimes I want, I'm going to give it to Danny Thomas for St. Jude's. Well, what's St. Jude's going to do with it? St. Jude's in the middle of the country, landlocked. So they sold it for to another person, a private person, just to get the money. But that's a picture of Elvis, of course, with Danny Thomas. And Elvis, the word I have is that he never stepped foot on board. He just bought it to give it away. So this is him, but not on board.
It's a good picture.
So there's a connection, yeah. So when I walk on the Potomac, then there's another connection there to Elvis Presley and Danny Thomas. Well, geez. People who bought it from Danny Thomas from St. Jude's, they were going to take it up to Northern California, and they thought about opening it as a disco. As a floating disco, they called it. Well, as you can see, it sunk, and so let's call it a sunken disco. The people brought it up. They were from Northern California, so they did tow it up to the Bay Area and actually even out to Fresno. And somehow all the changes of owners and uses got it in 1980. It was on one of the southern piers in San Francisco, being used not to go sail with, but being used as a drug runners, as the base, as the base for a drug running operation. So they just sat there at the pier, and ships would bring up marijuana from Mexico and bring it next to the Potomac, and they do whatever their distribution was. So one day, the feds got wind of it. Maybe literally, I'm not sure. But they found out what was happening. They followed one of the boats in who had marijuana stash, which at the time was the biggest stash of marijuana that was captured or stopped. So the boat with the marijuana came up, pulled up next to the Potomac, and they started unloading stuff. Feds walked in, grabbed it all, and it's drug property now, so it becomes property of the United States. It's back in the hands of the United States government, this ship. Then they towed it to Treasure Island in the middle of San Francisco Bay to a Navy base, and this is it having sunk at that Navy base because, and I talked with one of the divers who had actually helped bring the ship back up after it sank. He said the hull was so full of holes that probably not even the bilge pumps, which had failed, could even keep it up. So it just sank. But they brought it back up, they brought it out of the water, took it to the port of Oakland, and put it up on stilts. And this is a picture of it along the shoreline in Oakland after it was recovered from the water, and they're starting to dismantle some of it and trying to figure out what to do with it. I remember seeing this along the freeway at times. I thought, what is that? And I found out it was the Potomac. So this is before it was refurbished. Well, they decided to have an auction at the Port of Oakland and sell the ship. The director, I heard the director of the Port of Oakland, who was there at the time, give the story is that, okay, they got the auction group set up, the auctioneer, comes the time to sell the ship. auctioneer asked the Port of Oakland director, hey, could you just give an opening bid and we'll just let the bids go from there? So he said, sure, I'll do that. So he said, I'll bid, it was like $9,800 or $900, something like, just short of 10. He says, Port of Oakland bids this. Auctioneer turns immediately and says to him, sold. So they got the ship, not by their choice in a way, not anticipating. But they had enough, I think, foresight to say, it's historic, let's try to save it. So they were able to get some funds, federal government put in some funds too, and they were able to restore the ship and bring it back as close as possible to the way it was at Franklin Roosevelt's time. And it was launched then in the early 90s, now as a presidential yacht, and berthed in Oakland. And this is a shot of it on the bay giving a tour now. You can see all the people on the upper deck and in the bow, a bunch of people in the back in the fantail. And that's how it then got to Oakland, fixed up, and it probably will stay there forever. Because I don't think they're going to take it out of the Bay Area. So that's the history of Oakland's USS Potomac. Okay, all right, glad you made it. Thank you for coming. Okay.
Well,
Now, you slept overnight on that one night,
Yeah.
correct?
Oh, you
Were
did?
there ghosts on board?
I was hoping, I'll show you, I did sleep on
You did?
it. Sometimes they give late night tours, and they were going to have a late night tour and an evening tour, and then the next day there were going to be some morning tours. So I said, hey, can I sleep on board? Because some people were going to do that who were volunteering. So the executive director of the organization said, sure. So I decided I was going to sleep back here, grab a sleeping bag, and I was hoping to hear some something or see something. But no, not at all. I sort of got a little cold with the bay winds coming
Oh
through.
boy, I can imagine. Oh boy.
But that was very fun.
How many people are on the tours when you take the tours? How many people can it hold?